Hi, we're going to talk about compost today. I am not the authority on compost. There's lots of information on the internet for composting and composters. This is just what I do. I don't have any special knowledge. I've just done it for a while. I use the simplest of tools, the simplest of techniques. Basically, I put it in a pile and let it go. So come along with me, let's go compost.
For most of us, composting starts in the kitchen. There are a couple of rules that you have to remember when you're doing composting kitchen waste, and that is you don't compost anything that's been cooked. Cooked items have a tendency to attract vermin or rats or other beasties that are in your compost pile, which isn't really fun. Now I put mine in just a big pile, and every now and again you have to change that pile. You have to turn it over. And as you notice, I'm going to use 3 items, actually 4 items, in my composting. A pitchfork, which I'm using now, a shovel, which I will use later, a rake, which I will use for just a little bit later, and a garden hose. That's it. I'm putting it just in a pile. Now, as I start to do this, you'll notice that you'll see some steam coming off it. That is actually steam. The pile does get quite hot, and we'll talk about that and discuss that a little bit later. This pile is comprised of half leaves that I've gathered from my yard the previous day, and half what has been composting for about a week. So you'll see the difference in the stuff that looks kind of browny and the stuff that looks really new. And at this point of the game, which is fairly new early on in the composting cycle, you can still tell what everything is. After a while, it'll all kind of melt away. Now, a little bit is, you can see steam, and this is just a regular thermometer, a quick read thermometer, and I'm going to stick it in the pile, and you'll see that it starts about 80 degrees, and it tops out at about 160, and that's fairly high in the pile, actually. It gets hotter towards the center. And if you use a composter, any kind of a structure that you put it in, like a cube or a series of cubes or a barrel, or all kinds of stuff on the internet, it'll get actually hotter than that. But this is just a pile. And then you just continue. As you can see, there's more steam coming off the pile. And it gets actually quite warm. This day was about in the mid-60s. So that'll give you an idea of how much steam is on there. Now the water that you put on it, I just use a garden hose with a pistol grip thing, so I don't have to keep on turning the hose on and off again. And you want to keep the pile moist. You don't really want to keep it wet. You don't want it to be dry. There are those that compost, like my brother, that just kind of put stuff in a pile and let it go for years until it's done. By adding water and turning it regularly, you speed that process up. I can get this to be ready to put on my garden in about a month and a half. Depending on how active I am with it. You want to have a mixture of brown things and green things. Brown things being like dead leaves, green things being like yard clippings, like grass clippings, or you see all these leafy things. Those are from my next door neighbor's yard. Look at all the steam. Isn't that fun? It's kind of amazing how much it steams. Now it might smell a little bit. If it smells rancid, that means you might have something in your pile that shouldn't be there, or that it's decomposing in the wrong way. If you have it too wet, it'll decompose the wrong way, and it'll start to stink. If you have it too dry, you won't smell it at all. But to give you an idea of how quickly this stuff goes, you might see some brown things that look kind of like the green things that are on the end of my pitchfork. Those are the same age. They've only been in there a day or so, and they've already started to break down. They're already brown. So it actually happens quite quickly. You see me kind of mashing it down. That's just to build a base for the pile, because it's going to get about 4.5 feet tall. And it'll compress over time. All in all, I would say that turning this pile takes about 20 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that. Not a whole lot of time. But then again, it's not that big of a pile. My yard's not that large, but it suffices for what I use. I've been able to garden pretty much all that I want with compost that I've made myself. how wet you get it depends on how dry the stuff is to begin with. If I'm dealing in the summertime and the grass is very, very dry, I'll wet it down more. This is the fall or autumn, and it's still pretty moist. Here's just a shot of what it kind of looks like. That brownish green thing was all green the day before when it went to the pile. So it happens actually quite quickly. And at this point, it looks kind of like a salad. You can still tell what everything is or was. Once it starts to really break down and you can't tell what anything is anymore, then it's time to screed, and you'll see that in a future edition. Here I'm almost done, and I've switched from my pitchfork to the shovel. After a while, your pitchfork just won't grab anything anymore. Pitchfork is very efficient, and you could do the whole thing with a shovel. It'd be kind of tricky. It'd be really frustrating. Switching to the shovel just is when your pitchfork doesn't do any good anymore. And it's important if you're going to just pile it up like I do, and that's the easiest way to do it. Just stick it in a pile and let it go. To be able to get to all sides of the pile, because then you can really pile it up, so to speak. If you notice in the bottom, you'll see a little later, that there is kind of a trench that's dug out, and that's primarily because of scraping up a little bit of the dirt too, and that works as kind of like a seal. Kind of puts a layer of dirt all over the top, and everything ends up in the compost pile anyway, so might as well. Here I'm just kind of cleaning up the mess, and that keeps the pile looking like it should be there. And when people come in the yard, it's better that they see I think it's better for me and for whoever comes in my yard to see that there's a pile that's actively being maintained rather than just a clump of stuff over in the corner. Because let's face it, next to the garbage cans, there's not a whole lot I can do with this except for store stuff. And it's right next to the street too, so it's really kind of my utility part of the yard. So I think it's a great place. It doesn't get a whole lot of sun, so it's a great place for a compost pile. And as I said, everything gets in there. I put all kinds of stuff in the compost pile that probably shouldn't be there. But it gets all sorted out in the end, eventually. Here's where I'm kind of scraping out a little bit, and I do take out just a little bit of dirt. Because it's moist, you'll be able to scrape up just a little bit of dirt. And I feel it kind of makes a little shell while it's sitting there cooking. Keeps a little bit more of the heat in. And I'm just wetting it down again. I'm pretty much done at this point with turning it, and I just really kind of give it a good soaking. In this pile there are quite a bit of dried leaves, so and they'll soak up a good bit of water. And here's where I'm basically done, and it'll sit there depending on how much I want to be involved and how active I want to be. It'll sit there and cook. I could just let it sit there and do its thing, and I could come back in about 4 or 5 months, and it would be compost. I have a tendency to do a little bit more with it. Gives you a good representation of what I use my compost for. I just replanted part of my lawn, and as you can see, all the stuff that's planted represents about 50 gallons of compost. That's usually about one pile. I get about 50 gallons out of one pile about that size. That'll generate maybe a little bit more than 50 gallons. 50 gallons being a trash can in one of those big red tub things. It's about 50 gallons. But this is the next day, and you can see that it's already starting to get a little smaller. And that's where I just put all the stuff from the kitchen waste. I just, instead of letting it rot in the kitchen, I just put it out there and let it rot. The disadvantage is that maybe your pile starts smelling like onions for a little bit, but that's okay. Let's talk about what I do with my yard clipping can that the city takes away. I put in there all the stuff that's not going to decompose quickly, like sticks, any rose bush clippings I put in here, because thorns on a rose bush do not make for fun screeding later. I've learned that the hard way, but that's just basically what that is. That's most of an oleander bush and twigs and whatnot. And I do a lot of that when I screed it. A lot of that comes out of the pile.